time to look at the practice and practice it before the solution, I guess, which is always useful. But of course, getting really good at the practice exam isn't good for the real exam because it could be different questions. Yes? So it's more just so you see the format. I think it's always like, if you don't know what to expect at all, an exam is always a stressful situation, but if you don't know the format and sort of the way it's laid out, then it's very, very stressful. It's like, the first time I came here, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know how to get from the airport to here. New country, new culture, new cities, new university, new people, so it was all new, and then it's a little overwhelming, right? And by the second time, it's like, no, I get to the airport, I'll catch a grab, and then if I need something, I know what a supermarket is, and there was some familiarity, and so there was less overwhelming. I could concentrate on what was important here, which is teaching all of you. Right? So it's the same like the exam. I just want you to so you know the layout of the exam. But we'll take a look at that a little bit together later. So. I guess we're going to get started. People, Germans are really big on being punctual. They have a figure of speech, right? Like, so in English, we could say, if I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. In German, they have a lot of expressions like that, and it's about being on time. So one is, wer zu spät kommt, den bestraft das Leben, which is in English would be, those who come too late are punished by life. Morgen, nur nicht heute, sagen alle faule Leute. Tomorrow, but never today, is what all the lazy people say.
So maybe we can start now.
What's that?
I heard that maybe two of them have day off today.
It's okay. It's a funny thing to think about the different, because I've been coming in Germany so long that I've been trained to be worried about being on time. It's what happens when you're in a different culture for a long time. So
I think we can start
yeah,
now.
so we'll get started. We got the camera so they can catch up later anyway. So, all right. So the last couple of days, we went through very carefully, slowly through the new Keynesian model, right? And I guess to take stock in it. On the one hand, the intuition that you learned from ISLM is the same sort of mechanism, the same intuition that we see in the new Keynesian model in terms of the effects of, say, monetary policy. Qualitatively, we got the same answer. What we didn't have, we have now an explicit explanation of where a price adjustment might come to, how things transition over time. We spelled out the dynamics a whole lot more. When we started looking at the dynamic files, the computer files, and changing some of the parameters, we could see that we had different magnitudes of responses, different persistence, different timings of responses, right? And so this is what makes these models a very useful tool, particularly for policy. Right? It gives us then here, we ran experiments, right? We measure the rate at which those two things fall and conclude that they fall at the same rate, right? There's some consistency in gravity. We didn't want to run that experiment in the macroeconomy. We'd have to pick out which province do we pick out, which country do we pick out to run experiments on. We can't do that. So now we have a laboratory. You might say, well, we had a laboratory with IX11 before. True, but it was rather limited in the sense of how we can extend it. Right? We were able to expand it to exchange rates, which we'll see today, but adding different shocks would be problematic, and then specifying maybe the dynamics, the timing, the magnitudes. And it was all a little bit more, we're shifting curves around. We can say this kind of goes up, this kind of goes down, but that's about it. We have a much more richly detailed, specified laboratory. So it's a much more modern laboratory that we'd have in this new Keynesian model. Right? So we can now, instead of saying this falls, we can now say this falls and is accelerating at a rate of 9.8 meters per second squared. Both are consistent with each other. Both came to the same conclusion that they fell, but this latter one is certainly much more useful for policy. Right? Why? The head of the central bank in Vietnam needs to know more than whether they should raise the normal interest rates. They would need to know by how much and when, and what sort of consequences on the rest of the economy they should expect quantitatively. This is very important. Not just the qualitative results, but the quantitative results. And then we saw here, so we looked at comparisons under two different monetary policy rules, an interest rate rule, the Taylor rule, and an exogenous money supply rule. And we saw we get the liquidity effect from the interest rate rule. The liquidity effect is sometimes a little more fragile with the money supply rule. Different parameters would have gotten that back for us. But then we start to see the advantage of this model, and then comparing this to monetary policies when we looked at the productivity shock. Right? We see that the productivity shock is different than in a neoclassical model. So if you think of more like a perfect markets Walrasian market equilibrium, so maybe like a real business cycle model, or if you just look at a solo type model, right, where we have productivity, increase in production, right, and that's it, right? A technology shock is driving growth. Here we were able to see that our price dynamics, right, the staggered price setting, had some very significant consequences. Right? Namely, this increase in output from a positive productivity shock was smaller and more delayed. Right? Why? Even though we have this increase in productivity, it would tend to decrease marginal costs. Not all firms are able to adjust their prices. So the price drop with marginal costs ends up being smaller than it would be under flexible prices, which means prices don't fall as much, so demand for some goods doesn't go up by as much. Demand remains stagnated. Okay, and by comparing these two policies, we saw that monetary policy can assist, can accommodate, and work together with the economy, perhaps to restore, partially at least, this very large positive effect of a technology shock through an appropriate monetary policy. And with an interest rate rule, this was done automatically. We didn't have to add in an expansionary monetary policy shock. Right? Monetary policy automatically, like an automatic stabilizer with taxes like we saw, and you can recall, I'm sure, from a goods market in your bachelor's course. Right? We have an automatic stabilizer for the interest rate movement. The fact that output didn't go up by as much as it otherwise would under flexible prices means that we had a negative output gap, which would tend to lead monetary policy to lower the nominal interest rate. Firms were lowering prices, so we had a decrease in inflation, which would also lead to monetary policy tending to reduce the nominal interest rate. Right? So we have an automatic expansionary monetary policy, lowering the nominal interest rates due to the staggered price setting, the nominal rigidity preventing the economy from unfolding this technology shock, and the combination of these two ends up giving us a closer and a larger output response than we would have under an exogenous money supply policy rule where the nominal interest rate was kept constant. Here we saw a very large deviation from output from its natural rate. Output responded only very slowly because of this very large monetary nominal rigidity. Okay, now we want to adapt, update, extend the model to the open economy. We're going to have the same set of players in the game. We're going to have households and firms, and we're going to have financial markets. But we're also now going to have foreign economies, foreign demand, and interaction with foreigners, with these foreign goods and currencies on financial markets. We're going to define, we get to an IS type equation like before, and also a Phillips curve type equation like before. Right? We'll see there are going to be some differences. One difference we talked about briefly yesterday, which should jump right out at us, that we have different concepts of inflation now. Do we need, we talk about producer price inflation, so the inflation of goods produced in this country, or do we have consumer price inflation, inflation of the goods purchased by our households in this country? If we have imports and exports, these two prices, these two concepts of inflation are going to be different, right? Which is going to place monetary policy in a situation where they have to make a choice. And we're going to look at some different ways to think about monetary policy, and then we'll see what the consequences are. So we are going to have complete international financial markets. What we're going to see, there's going to be some, the way we write these bonds out is going to look a little bit hokey at first. We're going to be purchasing a security and paying sort of like an expected covariance price term. So when we write out in our standard budget framework, it looks a little bit confusing, but all this is an Arrow de Brut security. We're going to have securities that pay out in every state of the world to equal things out. So we can think of setting up financial securities that would ensure that you and I can trade with each other to equalize our consumption. Right? So you have income risk, I have income risk. We live in different countries. We have different stages of life and productivity, this and that. We can think about constructing or purchasing in a perfect markets world. There would be an infinite number of securities. When we talked about this, a security for every state of the world, right? That will pay. There's a more Vietnamese sort of negative shock. It'll pay you more. If there's a negative shock in Germany, it'll pay me more. Right, so we have this whole set of securities to perfectly share and then diversify away this specific country risk from consumers. Right? And to buy these securities, we pay in advance, right, an insurance premium that's just going to be based on this expected covariance term. Right? And we'll see, so it looks a little funny in the budget constraint perhaps. We'll see that it's not, it doesn't change like our consumption or other equations, so it's not going to be a big issue for our IS equation, but it is going to allow us to then draw some conclusions about how consumption in different countries is related. Right? If we've diversified away country-specific income risk, right, then we're all going to have the same consumption up to some rigidities of trade. Right, so we'll see this in a little bit. And we're going to assume that we have a law of one price in the long run. And this is going to give us then a tractable small-scale model. Right? It can be extended for wagers. We can also extend it to imperfect financial markets. Tomorrow we're going to look at our last model, where we look at a model where we have a financial friction. Right? We can think about then combining, of course, imperfect international financial markets in an open economy model. Right? Since we're going to learn, we're going to see that this is going to give us perfect risk sharing, consumption smoothing, sort of between countries. Obviously, if we have imperfect financial markets, then this risk sharing isn't going to happen completely. All right. So this is maybe just a good starting point. All right. So let's start with our households. Right? Our households consume goods. Right? We're going to put together a basket of goods, just like before. But now our basket is going to contain not only goods produced at home, but also those produced abroad. So we have to think about how we're going to assemble this basket. We want to assemble this basket in a way that we can think about the difference between domestic inflation or producer inflation at home and consumer inflation, consumer price index inflation. Our assumption is that we're going to have this Calvo price rigidity, just like we had yesterday or the last couple of days. And when we think about exports, we're going to make a particular assumption, namely that we're going to price our goods when we sell them abroad in our home currency. Right? And this is not the only way that this can be done. Right? There are models that look at different levels of exchange rate pass-through. Right? We could sell our products. We could set the price for our products in dollar, for example. Right? What would the consequence of this be? Right? Well, then our consumers in, say, America, right, wouldn't take on, their demand wouldn't be affected by the exchange rate, but rather, our profits would directly. Right? It's going to give different modes of how exchange rate effects are going to affect who. Right, who bears sort of exchange rate risk? Not yet. And then I'm just thinking, because there are different ways you can do that in terms of then pass through. So does the producer, if we price our goods in dollars, right, and our costs in dong go up, right? We can then using the current exchange rate, that would give us a new price in dollar, right? So we would have this pass through currency, right? But it's always a question, just like we may not want to pass on all of our marginal cost increases to consumers. And this model, our assumption was, we saw that our optimization problem gave us the goal of having a constant markup over marginal cost. right? We want to think about how this then translates when we have different prices, right? Currencies and prices that we can charge. Right, but we're going to make the assumption of producer currency pricing. So we're going to set the price for our goods in dong. Right? So if someone wants to buy our goods, they're going to have to pay us dong. And we don't care whether this person buying this is Vietnamese or Chinese or American. You want our goods, you pay us dong. Right? Okay. And we're going to get have a rigidity, sort of an ad hoc assumption, something we're going to call openness. We're going to have, when we assemble our basket of goods, right, when we start to think about the proportion of what we buy from the rest of the world versus what we buy at home, we're going to have a sort of home bias. In other words, I guess we'll do this step by step. No, let's talk about it. So, if our country is infinitesimally small, and we're trading with the whole world, right? The proportion of the goods that we in Vietnam. So remember, just like last week when we did the open economy lectures, you're going to make me an honorary Vietnamese. You know? So when I say we, please grant me for this lecture honorary, right? Make me honorary Vietnamese. So if our country is very, very small, infinitesimally small, then when we buy goods, we should buy, right? Our basket should have a proportion of goods probably related to the size of all the different countries' goods in the world, the size of the countries' economies in the world. Right? So if we have in other words, the proportion of Vietnamese goods in our basket should be related to the proportion of Vietnamese goods produced in the world. Right? If we have perfect trade amongst countries, right, there's no reason why people in Vietnam should purchase more goods, more Vietnamese goods, than people in China. Right? If we have perfect trading, so we don't have any model here, we have in the model trade costs or things that make trade costly. So just imagine we can push a button and Vietnamese goods, pop up in the market in Beijing, and vice versa, right? If we have this perfect amount of trading, then China's a very big country, right? It produces a lot of goods, so of course we're going to have a lot of Chinese goods in our basket, right? Vietnam is a little bit smaller, so we should have fewer Vietnamese goods in our basket. I think this makes intuitive sense. Yeah? But what we see in the data is that in Vietnam, people have a larger proportion of Vietnamese goods in the goods they buy than, say, people in China do. Right? And people in China have a larger proportion of Chinese goods that they buy, right, than people in Europe. People in Europe have a larger proportion. We tend to have a bias towards our goods produced at home.
Home bias.
Right? Home bias. And we're going to call this openness. In some sense, our economy is less open. It's more closed if we concentrate our demand more at home than abroad, proportional to the size of the rest of the world. Right? And we can think of this as like maybe modeling or being a stand-in for other rigidities. Right? So like there's a trade rigidity. Right? We can't instantaneously make our goods appear at the market in Beijing. Right? We have to ship them there, it takes time, it costs money to ship them there, we have to set up contracts. How would we know how to open up a stand to sell goods in Beijing? Right? So you have to have contacts, and how many people do you know in Beijing? Kind of like one person, but he moved away, and so how do I even begin? Right? There are barriers to trade here, right, beyond. Right, there are financial barriers, time barriers, cultural barriers. So there's lots of reasons to think that this openness wouldn't be perfect. And so if we have this imperfect openness, we're then going to end up having here some two state variables that we're going to talk about. We're going to keep the terms of trade, and real exchange rate. Okay, so how are we going to think about the world here, the world economy and our place in the world? So just like when we were thinking of price setting, we wanted to assume that each firm was infinitesimally small, so that its pricing decision in the end didn't affect any aggregate variables, so that when it's choosing its price, it didn't take the effect of its choice on aggregate variables into account, right? And we didn't get this extra feedback loop here. This made it very easy to split up aggregate and individual effects. We want to do the same thing right now with countries. So we're going to assume that the world isn't just 200 countries. It's not just, how many continents do you have in Vietnamese? In Germany, they have a different number of continents than in America. We talk about, when I was going to school in America, we had North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia, and Antarctica, 7 continents. And Germany talks about 5 continents. Right? America, Europe, Asia, Africa, and Australia. And Antarctica they don't count because it really no one lives there. So they're talking about 5. So, right, so we have 5 continents, we have 7 continents. How many countries do we have? I think the number's about 200, 210, recognized by the UN, right? Larger, no. How many regions do we have, or districts, states do we have? We're in the thousands. No, we're going to go, the limit here, we're going to assume that we have an infinite, but not only an infinite number of countries, right? We're going to make this then measurably infinite, right? So we have as many countries as there are colors in the visible light spectrum. This is going to be useful because it's going to allow us to use this integral trick and the perfect sampling, the perfectly representative sample that we had last time. So continuum gives us allows us to use integrals and differential calculus. So it's going to make some math, give us some math help. But the whole idea of making these countries really, really small is simply to remove this feedback from the performance of one economy to the rest of the world. Right? You can think of my favorite example is a country in Europe called San Marino. Have you ever heard of this country? It's a little dot inside of Italy. It's a little teeny dot there in Italy. And it's an almost independent country. Its size is 61 square kilometers. So, Ho Chi Minh City now is bigger. Ho Chi Minh City last year, I think, was probably still bigger than the whole country of San Marino. It has a population of 34,000 people. If San Marino buys more goods or less goods, produces more goods or less goods, this has essentially zero impact on the world economy. It doesn't affect things. San Marino is this tiny little country. Right, so this is going to be our assumption. The world is just made up of lots of San Marinos. We're going to make, again, we want to focus now on the staggered price setting, and we want to focus on impacts of trade and exchange rates that have nothing to do with any individual country characteristics. Right? It's a baseline. When you start applying this then to the real world, you want to keep taking into account that maybe there are different preferences in different countries. We talked, I gave some examples last week when we looked at German savers not responding to interest rates going down. I compared Germany and Japan. As an American who's been in Germany for a long time, Germans have different preferences on average, I think, than Americans do. Germans tend to be very risk averse. There's lots of data to support this in terms of financial market data. So if we were going to build a model where we have trade between Germany and America, we would want to take into account that Germans have different preferences than Americans. Right? And then there's going to be different effects of trade if one group of people are more risk averse than another. Right? They have a stronger consumption smoothing motive than the other group. Right? But as the baseline, first we want to make everything equal across those countries, and then add in this change. So think of, this, we're going to give ourselves a baseline where everything's the same, and if you want to apply this model, extend this model to more real life situations, you would have this as the baseline to then understand the effect of any change that you would make to make the model more realistic. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're not going to add the country index to our own country. Otherwise we're going to have tons and tons of indices, right? We're going to have indices of firms and indices of countries in our particular country. So we'll have our country, we'll have the rest of the world, and we'll talk about another single small open economy with I. The rest of the world is going to have an asterisk, right? A star, Right, so what are our preferences? We're going to have preferences over consumption basket, just like before. Right, this consumption basket, however, is going to have home, domestically produced, and foreign produced goods. Right, so we're going to have some share, call it alpha, of our goods are going to be imported. Right, hence, our CPI inflation is going to be different than this domestic inflation. And we're going to have this international risk-sharing condition that I mentioned. It's going to link then consumption to the real exchange rate. So what we're going to have then is an exchange rate movement that's going to directly affect consumption and inflation, depending on how open we are. Right? We can close off our economy, have an openness of 0, then we wouldn't trade with the rest of the world, and in that case then we would not have the effect of exchange rate movements on consumption and inflation. So the more open we are, right, we're going to see the larger the effects on consumption and inflation of exchange rate movements are going to be. So let's imagine we have the same sort of lifetime utility problem for households as last time. So our households are trying to maximize their expected discounted sum of lifetime utility, where they derive utility from consumption and they suffer from having to work. And what we need to do is we need to assemble this consumption index, this consumption basket. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to do it in a nested way. We're going to first assemble our basket based on domestic goods and then foreign goods. And then we'll see foreign goods. Foreign goods can come from many different countries. How do we assemble these foreign goods out of Chinese goods, American goods, German goods? Right? First, we're just going to look at, we're going to put together our final consumption basket of Vietnamese goods and imported goods. Now, openness here, this index of openness, so if alpha is equal to 0, then our consumption is then equal to consumption of domestic goods. Right? We're going to have no imports.
Closed economy.
A closed economy, just like we saw yesterday. Exactly. If we set alpha equal to 1, then we're perfectly open. And what happens then is that our consumption is entirely equal to imported goods. What's this weird? Stop, wait a second. Our country is infinitesimally small. So if we're completely open, in the end we're going to have a share of our domestic goods and our consumption baskets equal to the relative size of our domestic economy to the rest of the world. Since our country is infinitesimally small, that share is then 0. You'll see other models, if we model maybe a finite number of countries, where then we would have a weight here that's then equal to the steady state weight of the domestic economy and the world economy. This is then going to give feedback effects because we have a non-infinitesimally small country. So things that happen in a domestic country affect the rest of the world. There'll be more feedback effects. We're making our lives easy by making our country so small, where San Marino, what happens here doesn't affect the rest of the world. And as a consequence, if we're really truly an open economy, we're going to have the same share of goods from abroad that the foreign economies share of the size of their economies are in the world. So, I mean, to think of it in another way, if I live in San Marino and I'm surrounded by Italy, I'm probably going to be consuming the same goods as Italians do. Right? Why would I? The supermarkets are also probably the Italian supermarkets. They have the same goods. So imagine if we didn't have, we have Winmark. Winmark is a Vietnamese supermarket brand. There's Chinese supermarket brands in China, and there's German supermarkets, Aldi, Lidl. There's American supermarkets, King Supers, and all these, they source things sort of, like locally. So you're going to have more American goods at American supermarkets, German goods at German supermarkets, and so on. But let's imagine we just had there's one worldwide supermarket. So imagine, maybe it's like Amazon, right? Or some very large international corporation, and they sell the same goods everywhere. If that's the case, we wouldn't expect us to have a different share of goods from different countries than people in another country. Right, so the share of our home goods in our basket, if we're perfectly open to trade, should be proportional to the size of our country to the world economy, and we are a San Marino, or even smaller, we're infinitesimally small, so this would be equal to 0. I'm belaboring this point because it's important to see that on the one hand, perfect openness here actually means that our domestic consumption, has 0 domestically produced goods in it, which is kind of counterintuitive, but this is a consequence of the assumption of making our country very, very small, which is mathematically useful. So that if you take this model or look at extensions of this model, it's important to think about what happens if you have realistically, Vietnam is the population-wise, it's the 15th largest country. Right? Vietnam is not San Marino, right? Things that happen in Vietnam affect the rest of the world. Right? So we would probably have this share here, even if Vietnam is trading is completely open, alpha would not be equal to 1 if Vietnam were perfectly open. Right? Why? Because Vietnam is not infinitesimally small. So we'd have to think about how we change some of the model, the way we assemble things for bigger open economies. And Vietnam is not a small open economy in the way we define small here. Okay. And now we need to put together our different baskets of goods. We're going to have baskets of goods from our different producers at home and from different countries. And in each country, we're going to put together a basket. All right, so we've got lots of baskets we're putting together here. So you can think of whole index, a whole spectrum of CHT bonds. Here, we have foreign goods, we're first going to assemble our
So is it J or? The J
Yeah,
is referring to the
Yeah.
goods and the I is referring to the country.
Yeah. We have J for the individual firms. Next, here we have, first we're going to assemble across different countries. Right? And then you can sort of think in each country, we're going to assemble this across the goods from each country. Alright, so we're going to look at our final basket. We're going to combine it with a Vietnamese basket and a foreign goods basket, an import basket. This import basket is going to be composed of final goods baskets from all around the country. Right? So you get in Ho Chi Minh City, the ship arrives, and it has the final goods baskets from China, from Germany, and from the like. Now these baskets themselves were before assembled from all the different goods in each country. So we have some Chinese water, Chinese cell phones, Chinese rice, Chinese bread, right, in there. And we also have German rice, German bread, German water, German cell phones, right, in the German basket. Right, now what we're going to assume in terms of goods from individual firms, we're going to have the same elasticity of substitution, 1 epsilon. This is going to make the math easier. We can already think about why this might be an unrealistic assumption. Like, how did we interpret this epsilon? Yesterday, the substitution elasticity between goods was also a proxy or measure for competition in a country. Right? Remember, we had the example of like the average elasticity of goods. If we just have one economy where there's just one washcloth, one marker, and these goods are not very easily substitutable for one another. So the average elasticity of substitution in this economy is going to be pretty low. Okay? If we add in more competition, right, for each of these goods, on average, we have more substitutability. You know? So essentially what we're doing here, though, we have the same epsilon for every country I. Right, so there's the same amount of average competition in every economy in the world. Probably not a realistic assumption. You know? It's going to make our lives easier to math, so we're just going to go with it. Again, it's another, you know, start making a list of things that might be useful extensions. So think again, Google Maps. Right? Where we have a Google map here that's going to give us a very straightforward way to think of open economies. But you know, sometimes it's nice to Google map to see the topography. If you're going to go for a hike in the mountains, maybe the street view, or there's all different buttons you can push on the Google Maps to get different perspectives. Right? So just think of a list of different buttons that you would look at. But we're going to have a different elasticity of substitution between goods of different countries. or the baskets of goods between different countries. So that's, right, somehow the competitiveness within each economy is the same, but we're going to have, right, a basket from these different countries isn't going to be perfectly substitutable. So that's how we get sort of the differentiation of goods from different countries. I mean, maybe the idea being, you know, the Chinese basket of goods isn't perfectly substitutable for the German basket of goods. The German basket of goods has like German beer in it, and Chinese beer is fantastic, but it's not as good as German beer, right? Or, you know, you can even think of things like that, specialties or whatnot. So if this gamma goes to infinity, then we're going to have perfect substitution between the final goods baskets from different countries. That's the elasticity of substitution between the varieties of one specific country, right? For the sake of epsilon, that's the same. In our countries, it's the same as in any other country. And gamma elasticity substitution between goods produced in different countries. Right now, also you can think of ways that is this the only way that we can aggregate up goods from individual firms or from individual countries? No, right? There are other ways that you can do this. This is just a very mathematically convenient way. Right? It's a Dixit-Stiglitz aggregator, or it's a constant elasticity of substitution aggregator. Right? And that these elasticities is constant, right? And we can scale things up or down, and it doesn't change these elasticities. It's very useful mathematically. Right? We just have this one parameter that we need to think of when we're aggregating things up. There's a lot of literature that looked at, or has been looking at different aggregators, particularly one being a Kimball aggregator that has this elasticity, not constant, right? But depending on like some aggregate variables, right? Because it's this extra bump in some cases. Math is a little bit more tricky, but sometimes it can be more useful. So again, we have, at every step of the way here, we're making specific assumptions, right? And these assumptions aren't the only way you can do things, right? And these assumptions are also wrong. Right? Every model that we look at is wrong. Right? Again, just like Google Maps is wrong, it doesn't show every leaf on every tree. Right? So we want to be aware of what assumptions we're making. Okay, so now we're going to look at our budget for our household. All right, so we can identify our expenditures. That's why this inequality sign is useful. And what are we going to do? Well, we're going to buy goods, we're going to buy bonds, right, and we're going to have income. All right, let's look at the source of this income here. We might have transfers, right, either from the government. It could be negative in terms of taxes. They could be profits from the firms. Right, but the point is they are, from the household's optimization perspective, they're exogenously given. Then we're going to have labor income. Right, this is the only reason why we would choose a positive N. We don't like to work, right? But when you work, you get paid. You're the wage. That's why you like to work. And then we're going to have the payouts from our bond purchases last year. And then we have our expenditures. First, we have expenditures for goods. And we're just going to split this up. We're going to first sum. It's the integral because we're doing this infinitesimally, but it's the sum of our expenditures on each individual good, J from our country. Price times the quantity for each good J, and we sum it up using differential calculus. Then we're going to sum up all of our expenditures from each country. We're going to form this. So from each country I, we're going to sum up our purchase of goods from that country. Well, in each country I, right, we have expenditures on individual goods. So we're going to sum up over our purchases of Chinese beer, Chinese rice, Chinese cars, Chinese batteries, Chinese clothes, Chinese, and then we're going to sum up over German cars, German clothes, German, summing up over all, so it's a double sum here. The expenditures of price and quantity of every good from every country that we buy. Alright, so this is just a sum of all of our expenditures for goods, every individual quantity times every individual price. And we have our portfolio expenditures. And this is what I said, it looks a little funny here. We have this expectation term here. What's going on here, it's the way we're going to do risk sharing. Right, so we're going to pay, for a payout next period that's going to depend on the expected covariance of this payout and our state-dependent valuation next period. And we're going to average across all these possible states. So essentially, we have exactly here this stochastic discount factor already in our expenditure. So we have a perfect risk sharing in an international market, and what we pay for a security is equal to our valuation of the security. And we have a number of different possible states of the world that could come out. Between today and tomorrow, we could have, we could become rich, we could become poor, we could lose our jobs, we could get a better job. All possible states of the world and how these possible states of the world are then correlated with this with a payout here across countries. And we're going to pay then here the time t expected value of this. All right, we'll see in a little bit, step by step, how that becomes useful. Right, so essentially, we just have in other words, imagine if you buy an insurance, right? One of the securities you want to buy like a life insurance or unemployment insurance or the like. In many places, what you would have to do, you would call up the insurance company and they would ask you some questions. How old are you? Right? What's your health? Right? What's your education? What's your current job? Right? They're going to use all of these. It's going to be, they're trying to figure out what your individual risk is. Right? And this individual risk with what they see as their exposure, what they're going to pay out in these different cases. This person, it's very likely they're going to lose their job. And there's the unemployment insurance, so it's a fixed 60% of their last wage. So if they lose their job, they have a very good job now, that's going to be a lot of money. And so they're going to do all these calculations for what their expected cost is going to be. Right? And that's going to be what you pay. Right? So you pay the insurance company, right? The insurance company's expected loss, and then when the next period comes, you get paid more, right? If you lose your job, the insurance premium pays out. Right? If you don't lose your job, you get paid out less, but you're paying this premium sort of upfront based on these individual risk characteristics. And the consequence is then that your income next period is then less risky. That's why you buy insurance. Whether or not I lose my job, right? Based on just my labor income, if I keep my job, my income's here. If I lose my job, my income's down here. But I'm going to buy insurance, right? I mean, that would raise my income. If I lose my job, would pay out, right? And because of the insurance premium, right, maybe I'll pay it next period, my total income will be down a little bit. But I have, right, these two incomes in the two different states of the world are more equalized. With perfect risk sharing, right, if you perfectly insure yourself, then your income the next period would be the same whether or not you lose your job. If you buy complete unemployment insurance. And so we have essentially here like a complete set of these sort of insurance contracts that our households can buy. And because they're risk averse, our households, right, we saw the concave utility function, they always prefer to be paid out average consumption, right, rather than some variable consumption.
Professor,
Yeah.
maybe you would like to do that. So like when we talk about the budget constraint, I saw like there are budget constraints intertemporal one that only like two consecutive periods t and t plus one.
Yeah.
And also like I see another version of like a whole lifetime.
Yeah.
Like with the Ponzi scheme, Ponzi scheme, something like that.
Yeah.
But this one just like at this time, at the end of month T or at the end of year T, because like.
So this is the same, just a one-period budget constraint, just like we have in the Keynesian model. So it's the same one that we looked at in the last model. We can write a. So we have PT, CT plus, and we do the discount bonds from last time. Call it QT, DT. Less than equal to dt plus wt nt. Now let's assume that there aren't any transfers between dt minus 1. And if we write this for the next period, think back to last week when we were looking at the consumption savings problem. The way we solved this problem, so I gave the exercise a bunch of different solutions, but one of your classmates reformulated the problem to just solve the amount of savings. Right? That's what this dt is here. Right? You can combine these equations, and what we did, we have this. Let's go ahead and do it. Then we'll just go more clear. So we would have then PT CT plus QT PT plus 1 CT plus 1 plus QT plus 1 QT plus 1. dt plus dt minus 1 is wt nt plus qt wt plus 1 and t plus 1. And if you write this out, n periods, which you're going to get, and this, I'm going to get them. N product and we have the same problem. We have a conceptually that we saw with the consumption and savings problem. We have a present discounted value of lifetime expenditure, present discounted value of lifetime income. And this would be the lifetime budget constraint version. We have some initial wealth that we start with, and then we have this term here. Right? This would be then in the limit. Right? So we do the limit. Assuming that this is 0 in the limit, is a then no Ponzi condition. We're not going to. Right, what would this mean if this were non-zero? This would mean that we would save. We impose this if you go back to our point here. With the intertemporal budget constraint from our household there, we assume, one, we have no savings, no initial wealth, was an assumption, but we also assume that we don't save after period 2. Right, you would think, when we wrote this, we had consumption period 1 is equal to income in 1 minus savings. Right, or let me write it. Consumption 1 plus savings, and 1 was equal to income. So you can also think of plus, right? You could have some initial savings from, maybe your parents left you savings. Donald Trump, President of America, says that he is a self-made man, right? Which is a statement that he did everything himself, because when he turned 18, his father only gave him $1 million. Oh. My life would have been a little bit different had my father given me $1 million when I turned 18. You know? So his S0 was 1 million, not 0. You know? All right. So we can think of having this also be potentially non-zero. Right? But then what we had was we had then our consumption in period 2 was equal to income in period 2 plus 1 plus R times the savings from period 1. We could also have added in the possibility of saving in period 2. We set that equal to 0. Why? Our household only 2 periods. Our household dies, no longer exists after period 2. So, well, there are 2 possibilities that we could have. If S2 is negative, or I'm sorry, S2 is positive, right, our household would save. But why would you want to save after, for after the end of the world? If there's no uncertainty, right? If you have, really sad, let's say you're alone in this world, you have no family, no friends, or anything like that, and you know you're going to die tomorrow, you're not going to save. You're just going to go out and have fun. All right, so it doesn't. We understand why S2 shouldn't be positive. It would be wasteful. Why we have our utility function? Before we waste, we could always just consume it. There's another possibility. This gets finally to your question. It's taken me a while. How about S2 being negative? That would be fantastic. No? I know that I'm going to die tomorrow. and I go to a bank and I say, lend me $1 million, right? Then my last day here, I can have a really big party, and then tomorrow when the bank wants its money, I'm gone. Yeah? Tough luck for the bank. Yeah? But we're in a world, when we look at this model, with no uncertainty. So the bank knows, they see, my medical chart, they say, but Professor Meyer-Goda, you're dying tomorrow. I'm not going to lend you any money. So S2 also can't be negative. That's the only option that's equal to 0. In our infinite life model, we have uncertainty, right? So from a period T perspective, right, which only has to hold an expectation, right? If it, let me stop for a second. Let's say, 1 second. It's a great question. You got me really excited.
Oh, can I think you don't have data.
It's just one that I think is useful to think about. There's no Ponzi scheme. You're going to see this show up in a lot of places. If we know that n is the last period of our life, the bank knows it too, right? And there's no uncertainty. It's the same as this term here. It'll be the same argument that we went through. The bank is not going to lend me money. I can't have negative savings until after I die. That would be infeasible. And it would also be unoptimal. So it would be feasible in non-optimal. Yeah, non-optimal for me to have positive savings, right? Money left over after I die. That would be wasteful, right? So the Ponzi scheme is if this equals 0, and you get the condition that, well, if the world's uncertain, the bank and I don't know exactly perhaps when I'm going to die. This goes out to infinity, right? This death doesn't actually happen until the limit, right? But this last term here should be equal to 0. And the no Ponzi scheme intuition, right? The idea there is that it's some sort of savings borrowing scheme that I like my explanation more because the no Ponzi scheme is always like a pyramid scheme explanation. It rules out bubbles, and we've seen some of this before, right, in the financial markets lecture. But here I would just think of this in terms of savings after you die. You don't want to have positive savings, things left over after you die, and the bank doesn't want to lend you money that it can't collect on after you die. Right? And so then we could work with this lifetime budget constraint instead of a period budget constraint, but it ends up being simpler with for us at least, where we're doing Lagrange to use the period budget constraints. So does that?
Yeah.
Yeah? All right, now we know how to go through and derive the demand functions with these CS aggregators. Right? We did this in the lecture, and we did this in the problem set together. Right? So let's give ourselves fixed budget ZT and go down to the market and assemble optimal domestic consumption goods. Right? Let's give ourselves a fixed budget and go to Beijing to the market and assemble a wardrobe from a basket of goods from there. The same thing then right? So we get then these price indices that are also related, the individual prices through this geometric weighting, right? With the same elasticity parameter epsilon we'll see above. Right, so we also have here, not only is our country infinitesimally small, but it's essentially just like any other country, right? Where we have the same elasticity substitution, so the same amount of competition, right? when we look at, we can do this the same, this is another question, the problem set. If we use this function here, let's assemble, let's go to the market. Right, and go to the market when we buy the docks, so there's the imported good and the household good. We can assemble do the same sort of optimization problems. It's good practice. So look at maybe the problems that we've done together for the closed economy McKinsey model, and see what you would do to calculate the demand functions with one. It's a little bit simple. We don't have the integral. There's just two items here, right? But there's a little bit more. Right, there's this alpha to the power of 1 minus eta, but you should too be able to do the same steps, right? And mechanically, you'll get them to the demand functions here, right? And here we see this openness again, right? So the difference to our standard way of thinking of the demand function here, right? We demand our household goods is equal to the average amount of the domestic. Our Vietnamese goods, our demand for Vietnamese goods is equal to our demand for, on average for goods, up to the relative price difference. Right? So if Vietnamese goods are more expensive, so this term is greater than 1, we have it to the negative power, so we have a factor out front that's less than 1. So if Vietnamese goods are more expensive than goods are on average, then we would have a lower demand for Vietnamese goods. And the same logic applies then for this foreign goods, these imports. But we have an additional factor here, and that's this alpha business out front. Okay? If we are if we're completely closed, alpha is equal to 0, then it doesn't matter what the relative price is, right? We're not importing. So think of Japan before the Meiji Restoration. If you know anything about Japan closed its borders for like 200 years. And only, I think, in one small part of Osaka was there any sort of trading. Right? So that they literally closed off the economy. They set alpha to 0. It didn't matter, right? What prices were of goods in China or the US or Germany or Vietnam. Japan wasn't buying, it wasn't selling. And again, right, by the same token, if we now have a perfectly open economy, if alpha is equal to 1, we're not going to buy any goods. Or in other words, because we have so many other countries to choose from, the share that our country has is so small. It's infinitesimally small. Right, the reason why is the way we split this is also important. We've split things up into two parts here. There's home and the rest of the world. Here, we have, we're just summing up over all firms. Right? All of our firms are equally infinitesimally small. Right? So we're comparing apples with apples. Here we're comparing our teeny country with the rest of the world. And inside the rest of the world is the entire sum, the entire mass of other countries in the world. Which is why when we compare, we buy our good or do we buy this exported, this imported basket. If we're open, our share in world's production becomes infinitesimally small. Which is why you would see this term go to 0.
So to come up with the two formulas, and since we already had to do the first revision, right?
Yeah, so I wasn't sure if we did the exercise. No, so we don't do that. We don't do that derivation in the exercise. It's a good thing. An easy thing, let's say, to practice. You know the steps to do it. The problem has just changed a little bit, right? So, right. Okay. And so now after we've done all this aggregation, our budget constraint looks a little bit simpler. We have our just total expenditures on consumption, expenditures on these area grew securities that be less than or equal to our income, which is the payouts from the securities that we bought last period, our labor income, and our transfer income. Our first order conditions, well, labor leisure trade-off, this hasn't changed. And our consumption order equation, or if we look at now QT as just this, the expected part that's component here. If we have the alternative, we can add, right, think of no arbitrage, we can get to this 1 period discount bond like we had before. So we get to the same domestic first order conditions for a household that we had before. The reason why this is useful in this assumption is made as per the budget constraint. We'll see later when we do risk sharing across countries. Right? So this means that from the household's perspective, there's no difference here compared to the last model with a closed model, right? Not quite. Remember, we have in C, we have not just the Y from home, we also have the Y from abroad. In P, we don't just have the prices from home, we also have the prices from abroad. Okay? We only work, right, at our domestic firms though, so our wage, there's also things to think about. If we have perfect risk sharing, perfect capital mobility, we can, financial markets allows us to trade across borders, or firms can operate across borders, but labor mobility is sometimes a lot lower. Right? We can't just go work wherever we want to. Right? You know, there's visas, there's restrictions, and this and that, where labor mobility is restricted. So the wage, there's wage differentials perhaps across countries. All right, when we log linearize, we get the same log linearized equations from the Keynesian baseline Keynesian model. Right?
Professor, can we go back to the previous slide?
Yeah.
One is like, well, when we QT equals to accepted, and time to log QT equals to, because it discounted, so that's a discount factor, right? So what we can get from the future, so that's a discount factor, which is the discount factor at this time, like where QT goes.
What's the question exactly?
I mean, like, can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so we can add in when you want to take like the first order condition, we can add in maybe no. So let's look at the optimization problem. Look at that time t. let's add in another security. Let's add in this Q plus B, remember what B plus S. We write the Lagrangian we write out the first terms, so right here CT NT minus lambda T PT CT. Now we have this expectation right out front. That's a law of iterative expectations. Allows us to write that plus PT minus BT minus B minus 1, so BT NT minus TT. Here this needs to be something that not moderate expectations. You can write it again here like expected value. Yeah. Let me just, I'm going to forget about the labor part. Let's just choose CT. BT and DT plus 1. C minus lambda T CT. Because these are all known at T, you can then write this then as you see T equals lambda T CT. Okay, now to take the derivative with respect to dt plus 1. This gives us then minus lambda T times qt plus 1. And that shows up next period. So we have plus, which I'll get theta here. Sorry. lambda t et equals beta. The point here is that this payout is stochastic. You're buying insurance today. What's the payout of your insurance tomorrow? Depends. Depends on whether I crash my motorbike or not, whether I lose my job or not. Right? So I don't know today what the payout of this insurance is going to be. Right? It's a stochastic. That's the payout. Is stochastic. And now let's do one last. The other security here. And we get then t minus lambda t minus lambda t plus 1 minus 1. And we get then here lambda t qt equals beta et lambda t plus 1. And if you compare these two, it must be the case that qt is equal to right, so you can think of this as sort of like a discount price. So you add in securities. What is this comparison? What we've done here, we've essentially done an arbitrage, right? It's all this arbitrage, like no arbitrage. We can, if you're not sure about how to do the arbitrage argument, what you can always do is what I just did here, is actually add this other security into the maximization problem, and it will then follow here. The idea being, if the household is behaving optimally, if I have the choice between two securities, right, the one with the higher payout is the one I'll buy. So if both securities are going to exist in my portfolio, they must have the same payout. Well, the same payout in what sense? Well, in the expected discounted sense here, right? And, you could think of securities that are more complicated. Right? You could add in here if you wanted to. Maybe, so think of adding in Q, call it A2. Maybe you have a bond that it's a 2-period discount bond. Right? You could derive the yield curve by simply adding in a security that isn't over 1 period, but over 2 periods. Right? And this would then pay out this B of 2 t minus 2. It wouldn't show up until out until 2 periods later, right? And so you end up getting a first order condition of lambda t qt2 equals beta squared et lambda t plus 2. And you could now compare this with the 1-period bond, this period, the 1-period bond, next period in absolute value. Right, so we could write this now as qt2 over qt is equal to beta 1. Right, and if we then divide this through by this. Plus 1. This would give us then lambda t plus 1. Oh, yeah, so if we divide this through by so really care about a covariance term that I'm ignoring here. Just forgive me for a second. No, so that's not the best way to do the argument. All right, let's take a break. Right? You have to be careful with these things. I was going to do them the fly and straight quickly, but